It should be perfect.
Question number one for you guys. It's maybe directed at Justin. Like, let's talk about the role of estradiol or estrogen in three things: metabolism, fat distribution, and body composition during perimenopause and menopause. Like, how much of an impact does it have? Like, even if women, their diet and training stays the same, a lot of women, just from the calls I'm doing, they seem to just out of nowhere gain belly fat. Is it really hormones, or is it what's going on? Is it estradiol
I
or
would,
what?
I'd say it's a probably multifactorial system when we look at it. So the average person probably underconsumes protein and micronutrients. So that's one thing that potentially could be an issue there. I'm not going to say it's all hormones, but diet, lifestyle, those are the things that we preach here that are very important. Now we look at endocrine function. Women's primary driver is estrogen. Make three different types. Estradiol is the most prominent and potent of those estrogens. When our ovaries or when women's ovaries, I don't have any, when they start to deplete, metabolism slows down. So we think about estradiol going lower, um, progesterone going lower, and testosterone. We'll focus mainly on estrogen. So if someone already has unfavorable body composition and they have less estradiol because the ovaries are in a peri or in a postmenopause situation, peri meaning there's months where they are making estrogen and other months where they're not, and then postmenopausal where they're not making any estradiol or very little. What is our other estrogen that is going to be primarily available? Estrone, which is made in the adrenal glands, in adipose tissue, in the liver. So that particular estrogen can be more problematic. That is going to be your main driver of estrogen. And it tends to be lower. So we just have less estrogen, and the estrogen that we have is estrone, which can be more problematic. That in turn can slow down metabolism. Estrone is going to be stored in body adipose tissue. Most women tend to hold weight, hips, waist, abdomen tends to be the area where a lot of fat tissue with that specific type of estrone can sit and hold. So your metabolism will slow down without estradiol. The only estrogen present is probably the one you don't want an abundance of. It can impact metabolism, body composition. I personally think more about the cardiovascular system. Estrogen protects endothelial cell function, so we look at the vascular system contracting and expanding. So blood vessels become hard over time. My concerns would be, am I at risk for cardiovascular disease? We know estrogen has a lot to do with glucose metabolism in the brain. So I would be worried about dysregulation of blood sugar via the brain, dementia, Alzheimer's. Those are things that potentially could be issues later. And last piece is osteoporosis. So yes, I know we're worried about metabolism, but I would be really focused on how am I going to be in my 60s and 70s? Am I going to be brittle and not be able to move and have insomnia? Those are the things that I think are most important. When we look at having adequate hormones, we probably have more energy to move around, burn more calories, go to sleep, stay asleep, manage stress, manage inflammation a little bit better. I hope that answers your question, but that's what I really think about estrogen.
So is estrogen kind of the last sex hormone to kind of bottom out? Is progesterone the first kind of one, testosterone, or does it fluctuate wildly during the 40s? Or
I think it varies. I think what we see a lot of times, progesterone will start to dip. Is that due to adrenal function? Maybe. Is that due to inflammation? Maybe. Maybe it's probably both. I think that progesterone will start to go out of whack. Testosterone is right there with it, starting to deplete. If that's due to allostatic load and adrenal dysfunction, so progesterone, testosterone start to go down. And then estrogen is what I usually see start to dwindle at the end of peri into postmenopause. We start to lose that. And then we're in absence of sex hormones at that point.
so perimenopause is what, the 4 to 10 years before a woman actually enters menopause.
I
Usually.
would say It varies from woman to woman. Unfortunately, I've seen women in their early 40s go through menopause, and I've seen women upwards to like 55, 56. The average age is 51. It could be 4 years, it could be 12 years. That's the unfortunate thing. And that's really why you want to keep track of it and see where you're at. If that's tracking your cycle, I'm a huge advocate of doing diagnostics, a couple times a year. So you can see that data over time start to decline. And if someone were interested in hormones, which I think most of us should pay more attention to that. That's when we start to replace things.
But there is no, maybe I'm wrong here. There's no test for perimenopause. You have to go by symptoms. Is that correct?
Symptoms, LH and FSH based off of the months. Some months you may have really high luteinizing follicle stimulating hormone, and that means your body's kind of skipping that beat. You'll hear women, oh, I bled for 5 months, and then for 3 months I didn't bleed, and then I bled again, or I didn't bleed for 10 months, and then I bled for two. So technically I'm perimenopause. If we're looking at like a diagnosis from a practitioner, you have to go one full year without a bleed, and that could vary. So there's not an exact way, really a lot of symptoms. And you can kind of look at diagnostics and see where there is months or gaps where you're not uh, suppressing those gonadotropin hormones and hormones are present.
So menopause is just one day. It's 12 consecutive months without a period. And it's confirmed
That's
on
the diagnosis.
FSH above the number 35. What is the correct confirmed?
Yeah, I think I have a set right here. It depends on what diagnostic center you're using, but postmenopausal for luteinizing hormone can go up to about a 58 from Access Labs, and then luteinizing hormone can go all the way up to 134. Low end would be 25. So somewhere in that ballpark. Usually when those gonadotropins start to elevate into the 20s, you know that you're starting to have a dysfunction with the HPOA, the hypothalamus pituitary ovarian axis starts to change, and we see dysfunction there.
Okay, that's number one question. I like that. Number two question. Can we talk about the difference between synthetic hormones like HRT and bioidentical HRT? What's the difference? What are they?
That's a great question, and I think there's a lot of misconception around that. When we look at synthetic hormones, those are pretty much your birth controls, your progestin base, your methyl estrogens. These are synthetic hormones, meaning that they are not identical to what your body makes. So when we look at estrogen or estradiol, for example, it's going to be set up a particular way as far as the chemical structure. There may be different carbons with these methyls or methyl groups added. So methyl groups help pass through the liver. So that's why a lot of the synthetic base birth controls will be a methyl nor estradiol or methyl nor progesterone. So they are synthetic drugs, not identical to what your body makes. Now, bioidentical hormones are still made in a laboratory. They're not extracted from pigs or cows. They're basically a molecule that is identical to what your body makes. The reason why we would want to opt for something with that, when you put that into circulation, your body is already set up to metabolize these things appropriately. Granted, you're healthy, everything is moving appropriately. When you put these drugs in, they're going to mimic similar things to what your body does, or identical things. And that's what makes them bioidentical. Even though they are made in a laboratory, they're exactly the same structure your body used to make at one time. That's testosterone, that's progesterone, and estrogen can come in various forms. It's usually estradiol or estriol, a combination at different ratios, or straight estradiol if someone's postmenopausal. It just depends on what the individual is trying to seek with their practitioner and what combination makes the most sense for them. They're kind of blanket terms that some providers use. I don't really like that. I think everybody, when we look at hormones, is fully customizable. We all probably need different things, male or female counterpart of how much we need and what combinations do we need. And that's what I love about it.
So the safest version would be, are you saying bioidentical HRT?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm a huge advocate. I'm very open about this. Lots of members of my family use bioidentical hormones, and I've seen, very, very good success looking at their symptoms, Even if we're looking at some of the issues from like glucose, insulin, body composition standpoints, introducing bioidentical hormones and kind of reversing that menopausal clock seems to have really good health outcomes long term. Granted, someone's not at risk for breast cancer. Those are things you can still use hormones, but you want to consult with your doctor. Every practitioner is going to be different. But I'm a huge advocate of hormones. I think they're very important.
But let's talk about why HRT. It's not a magic pill either.
Very,
It's not like you're not going to magically burn belly fat. Like, can we talk about why it needs to be in conjunction with nutrition, lifestyle, your mindset, your overall, it has to be in combination with a number of things. A lot.
yeah, absolutely. I think that hormones are great. What we know about estrogen is if we're not metabolizing that correctly, so we have three phases of estrogen metabolism. The liver plays a role here. We have a phase two where we need adequate methyl donors, adequate antioxidants like sulforaphane to help phase two estrogen metabolism. That basically deactivates these hormones and allows you to pass them through the GI tract through phase three. Now, if someone has a hang up because they're missing their gallbladder because they had gall dysfunction and they have a slowed liver metabolism. And then we start introducing hormones like estrogen. Say that individual had estrogen dominance in their teens through their 20s, through their 30s. Now they're postmenopausal and they don't have any hormones, but they have all this bile dysfunction, liver congestion. If we bring those hormones in, we'll probably start to have those same issues. So it's very important to work on your metabolism of sex hormones and your detox pathways. We want to be in a lower inflammation-based state. I've been working with you for several years. I would say the majority of the women coming in here have some sort of low-grade inflammation, uh, adrenal dysfunction, maybe glucose and insulin resistance or dysfunction. Taking those hormones aren't going to magically fix that. You really have to work on this lifestyle nutrition piece. I would say that's the most important piece. Get in with the coach, really let them help you figure out your body, get things more efficient. So when you bring the hormones in, you can actually see what they do because it's not a magic pill. You may sleep a little bit better, but you're not going to have a huge change in body composition. It's not a magic drug. I wish it was. That would be great. I think we'd all just take hormones, but it's just not how it works.
Gotcha. So, why do some women gain weight on HRT? And like
Yeah, I would say
the water,
a lot.
the fat, or what's going on?
I would say probably an issue recycling hormones. So similar symptoms that we see when someone has a lot of estrogen in excess when they're still menstruating. They're unable to clear estrogens or have adequate amounts of progesterone. So we could see a flux in weight gain, maybe water retention. Sore breast is something I hear about women who are postmenopausal who start to use hormones. They're like, oh, I used to have really sore, dense breasts when I was menstruating. I would gain 5 to 6 pounds around my menstrual cycle, and then maybe I'd have mood disturbances. Well, now we're just backfilling estrogen and we're not working on those other pathways. So there's a chance someone could retain and hold weight from that 5, 10 pounds, and it won't go away because you have enough estrogen circulating in the body and you're not able to get rid of it in an appropriate time frame. That's usually the biggest thing. The other thing is if you're gaining weight by taking hormones, I would say you probably need to scale back and look at your nutrition. I don't think enough people pay attention to that. So I think it's probably excess hormones in an inflammatory state. And then we're not doing anything from a lifestyle nutritional standpoint. So it's not going to make anything better.
So it's a combination of things. Then it's inflammation and it's maybe calorie surplus, lifestyle.
If you're watching this and you're in North America, you probably the majority of us are in a calorie excess. It's almost inevitable unless you're very mindful of what we're putting in our mouth. We're kind of at a disposition with nutrition. I think a lot of us are aware of that now. So I think that's a big piece of it for sure.
But if you had your nutrition dialed in, your lifestyle, etc., calories, macros, does hormone replacement therapy have an impact on the weight loss? Right?
I would say yes, absolutely. Endocrine function. So if we have adequate hormones, our basal metabolic rate is going to be higher. I see this both in men and women. Men with very low testosterone usually have a very slow metabolism. The other thing when we look at estrogen and testosterone, those are also going to influence glucose metabolism via the liver. So we're just more efficient at burning glucose. Glucose is food for the cell, able to uptake that into the cell and use it instead of that blood sugar kind of floating around the body and storing in those problematic areas, your hips, your thighs. So having more metabolism or basal metabolic rate is probably going to speed up those other processes. I see that to be true. I coach some people here who have decided to use hormones, one specifically, and it has been very helpful for her in a short amount of time because she was doing all the other things.
Can you talk about low functioning hormones? Does it contribute to insulin resistance? Does it contribute to lipid panels, cholesterol being elevated?
Yeah, so I would say specifically cholesterol. We do a really good job here. We look at something called an ApoB. So your cholesterol is hydrophobic, meaning if you've ever put Crisco in a cup of water, it floats to the top. Your blood's about 80% water. So we need a vehicle to kind of deliver cholesterol to the body. Cholesterol is important. We have our brain's majority cholesterol. We need cholesterol to circulate appropriately, but when we are in loss of estrogen, we usually see an increase of low density lipids. What moves low density lipids? ApoB. So we have a lot of low density lipids, a lot of the vehicle carrying the low density lipids. And then this could potentially cause issues with cardiovascular disease. So someone is at risk for that, mom, dad, grandparents, cardiovascular diseases in the family. We have excess ApoB, we have excess LDLs. Those are more likely to fit into those small gouges and cracks in the arterial walls and build calcification. The other thing is testosterone is going to be a big driver for glucose metabolism via the liver. So, kind of what I said earlier, if we have low levels of testosterone, we're probably not going to be able to shuttle and move nutrients appropriately. So, metabolism will slow down for sure.
It really is a pro-inflammatory phase of life, isn't it? Menopause. It has an effect on the
Absolutely.
brain, the bones, the heart. It's the
Libido, that's another thing that I think is very important when we look at hormone replacement. Is The vagina is a canal. It's a hub for estrogen, and it's when there's loss of estrogen, that tissue becomes very permeable. So it's think of it almost like paper, and intercourse can be very painful. The canal can actually shrink over time. So, if someone's interested, you can go on Google and look at that. We're not going to do it for you, but you can see the canals start to shrink over time, and that's just due to a loss of estrogen because it's so important for reproduction.
what about it's kind of a weird topic, but you see old people in old folks' home, they actually are wearing diapers. What's going on there? Is that actually just obviously getting old, but is it because of just no hormones or what's your opinion?
That's a good question. I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't even think about that. So bladder, we look at being able to control pelvic floor, bladder, that those muscles become weak without estrogen. So sneezing, picking something up off the floor, there's a chance that someone could, have an accident because those muscles become weaker over time, unable to hold the bladder. I think of that more from like urinary incontinence versus bowels, but you do see that quite a bit with women as they age, starting to lose that ability.
Just goes to show you the importance of strength training, especially for women
Absolutely.
get to midlife.
Resistance training, I'm a big advocate of spending time in that hypertrophy or strength block. So building muscle or building strength. I don't really see a place for high intensity training. I think it can be helpful. Some people like that stuff, but I think that you can do so much more just by nutrition, staying in more of a zone 2 cardio and strength training. I think those are more sustainable goals when we look at bone health, muscle health, metabolic health versus just, if you're going to Orange Theory 2 days a week for 45 minutes and killing yourself and you're not losing any weight, I just don't think that that's the best way to achieve goals.
Exactly. I think there's a few questions there from the ladies.
Yeah, let's look. All right.
Sophia, can you share some signs of what people may experience if they're insulin resistant? I guess it could
Yeah,
for salt and sugar, maybe peeing more, weakness, fatigue.
I say those things for sure. Usually what I see with most women is fatigue after meals. So you have that higher carbohydrate meal and you're like, "Oh my goodness, I could lay down and take a nap." Insulin tends to be really high at that point, and they can make you sleepy. The other thing that we could see with insulin resistance, if you go prolonged periods without eating, weak, shaky, dizzy, hangry, cold sweats. Usually, what happens is insulin, glucose goes up, insulin counters that, blood sugar tends to drop, and then we're unable to restabilize that, and we start to have those symptoms. Other things is just the inability to lose weight. That's a really common one. That's probably the first thing when I look at diagnostics. I think I counted it a month ago. I think I've done over 200 sets of labs here. And I would say not the majority, but at least 50% of the women that I see here have some sort of low grade glucose dysfunction or insulin resistance. So those are things that I think most people should pay attention to. Just kind of the state we're in as the world. We're all just pretty metabolically unfit right now. So I hope that answers your question, but those are the things that I usually tend to ask.
So what are you seeing in the 200 labs? 50%, what their A1C is they're pre-diabetic or their insulin is should be high over 10. The glucose is what in the hundreds. That's what you're
I would
talking about labs,
I
is it?
would say it can be. So sometimes we're looking at extremes. So our blood sugar, our fasting blood sugar is 115, our A1C is a 6.0, and our insulin's a 20. Those are going to be someone who's very much type 2 diabetic. Now, if we look at someone who has an A1C of 5.5, they're right on the cusp. Insulin or glucose is maybe a 96, 97, but then we see the fasting insulin is 12, 15, 20. What's happening is the pancreas is losing the ability to regulate insulin appropriately. And that A1C is going to take a couple more years to catch that fasting insulin. So you're already having this insulin resistance happening. But our primary cares or our standard medicine, we're only looking at a hemoglobin A1C. And that's an estimation over 90 days. It's probably going to take you some time to catch that. And that's why we're such an advocate of looking at fasting insulin because it's an earlier indicator that, hey, we are having some dysfunction because our insulin is high and our glucose hasn't shot over the range yet because our insulin is overcompensating for that, trying to keep it within range. So it's just going to take some time and you are going to start to have, type 2 diabetes, unfortunately.
So what would do you suggest using I think it's called CGM or a glucose monitor with clients?
I think it depends on the individual. When I look at like CGMs and Aura rings, like the data is helpful, but sometimes people can get in their own way and really get some anxiety around those things because you're starting to see, hey, I'm only sleeping 2 hours or my glucose is really high, and that can stress you out even more. My thoughts with that is maybe do a glucometer once or twice a day so your phone's not pinging, every 5 minutes that your blood sugar's elevated. I think those tools are helpful, but they can be distracting and cause more stress. So, really, what I would say is work on your nutrition, work on your lifestyle, and those things should improve.
So nutrition would be fiber, obviously very important, 25 grams, depends on their calories. Animal protein, huge. Lifestyle, strength training, stress management. What I mean, chromium, berberine, good supplements,
All,
calcium. Would you recommend
all
metformin? It's very,
depends on the individual. It depends. So, say someone comes here and their practitioner was talking about putting them on metformin, and they're already type 2 diabetic or pretty close, maybe for a short period of time to improve that process. I like those drugs. I think they are helpful. It just depends on the individual and where they're at. I think you can probably get a lot of runway with things like berberine and good nutrition, so fiber, balancing fat, carbs, protein, fiber in your meals. Those things tend to be really helpful. Again, metformin's not a magic drug. I know plenty of type 2 diabetics who take plenty of metformin and don't have any improvements in body composition. So again, it kind of goes back to lifestyle, nutrition, stress management. Those are the bigger levers to pull. Then we just layer pharmacology on top of it if we need it, or nutraceuticals. But it's kind of that base foundation is the biggest thing. And that's why I wanted to work here with this group is like, you guys are doing all of these right things instead of just saying like, hey, take these drugs, everything will work out perfectly fine is like kind of setting the stage and getting really healthy prior to, using hormones would be my recommendation for the majority of people.
As long as the foundations are in place first, and then
Absolutely.
exactly. Let's talk about like estradiol. Is that mainly used for the bone density, brain fog, cardiovascular health?
Libido, we think about that. We think about collagen as well. When you get older, your hair starts to get brittle, start to get those wrinkles. I would probably think about using estrogen over Botox. If you're starting to have some issues with your skin, that Botox is going to fade away. I would think about replacing estrogen over that. We have more data on estrogen or estradiol over, putting Botox in your body.
That's crazy. Did women actually rub it on hardly their face?
There is estradiol and GHKCU creams that certain pharmacies make for collagen synthesis.
Oh, okay. Progesterone then, that's mainly for anxiety, sleep. It keeps estrogen in check. What do you mean keeps estrogen in check?
Yeah, estrogen is great. What we know about estrogen, it's proliferative, so it helps things grow. So what does that mean? It helps your bones stay intact and you can help that process from a bone mineral density standpoint. Estrogen can also be proliferative in the sense of breast tissue, reproductive tissue. Progesterone is kind of like that protective layer, so it keeps estrogen within tracks in check, so we don't start to have abnormal growths on the um, ovaries, on the fallopian tubes. I see a lot of women come in here with partial or full hysterectomies. And at one time, my questions for them usually are, okay, well, through your 20s and 30s, did you have heavy bleeding? Are you missing your gallbladder? Yes, yes. I had PCOS or estrogen dominance. And estrogen dominance is usually a lot of estrogen, unable to clear it, and then probably not enough progesterone at certain times of the month to balance things out. So I think of it as almost a protective mechanism for endometrium. It's going to have those other benefits as well from working off of GABA in the brain, having a calming effect. At certain doses, can act as a mild diuretic. At excess doses, can make you retain water. So you want to be careful with that, ladies. If you're going to see a practitioner and they're loading you up on 400 milligrams of progesterone and you're not feeling well, maybe too much. Again, the thing I love about hormones is it's not a one size fits all. We really have to customize things for people.
Is there studies shown that it can work for PMS, PMDD, the last 15 days of a woman's cycle, progesterone?
That's a good question. I don't think I've ever seen any like set clinical data on that. I can say anecdotally, I've seen a lot of that, but I couldn't point you to a reference off the top of my head. But I've worked in the HRT setting for, I guess, coming on 4 years, and I can say that I've seen that be beneficial for some women for sure.
Okay, testosterone, that's prescribed for low energy, muscle mass, low libido. Is it common that some practitioners actually prescribe testosterone for women?
In perimenopause, I'd say it's probably the first thing that or progesterone is what I see prescribers do a lot of. What we know about testosterone is, say someone's going through perimenopause and or testosterone's pretty low and estrogen may start to vary a little bit. The cool thing with testosterone is it has something called aromatase activity. So it's going to convert from androgens into estrogen. So you may get a little backfill of estrogen from that testosterone. Testosterone is also going to help with, yeah, libido, muscle mass. It's also going to work off the neurotransmitters. It's going to help with stress resilience. I think of it almost as like a mild antidepressant. I've seen clinical data showing that women breastfeeding who are what's the term I'm looking for? It's early here, who may be having postpartum depression. There's one particular study that I can point you to that showed that testosterone replacement therapy was safe, didn't transfer to the infant, and it may be more helpful than conventional psychoactive drugs. So I think it's very, very potent from a cognitive standpoint, from an energy well-being standpoint. We can see improvements in muscle mass. We can see improvements of libido and stress resilience with it. Very common to use. The issue is not taking too much. I've seen several ladies overdo it and start to experience side effects. Again, it comes down to everybody's different and how we metabolize these drugs.
When you say overdo it, it's how they're administered. Like pellets are, once pellets are inserted, testosterone pellets, it kind of can be overdosed. Is that correct?
You can overdose injection too. If you go to a practitioner who's giving you a high concentration of testosterone and they're just giving it to you and having you walk out of the clinic. I have a lady that I met with last week. Her testosterone was upwards to 250, which is very high, and she was starting to grow facial hair, and she didn't know why. So letting her know, she was taking 25 milligrams of injectable testosterone. That's a lot for a woman. So it's very much getting a good dosing. I would say somewhere 2 to 7 milligrams a week is probably most women are going to fit within that. Maybe there's some outliers, but most women do not need 25, 50 milligrams of testosterone. Pellets are the other thing. So you insert a pellet, goes into the muscle. The idea of a pellet is really cool. We think that, oh, we don't have to do anything for 3 months, but we look at the metabolism of that pellet. Some women may make it last throughout 3 months. Their body may know how to break those hormones down. What I see more times than not is women put a pellet in, their levels go sky high for the first, 6 weeks, and then the last 5 or 6 weeks they're bottomed out. So they have this roller coaster of hormones, and pellets are expensive. They're not covered by insurance, and you may not be relieved of symptoms. So I just don't think that they're the best option. I know some ladies like them, but I tend to see them not be as efficient as a cream or an injection. I'm a bigger proponent of injections.
That's what I was going to move on to, dosage for HRT. It's based on blood work, the symptoms, obviously, but like let's break it down. Patch, there's the patch, the cream, the pill, the pellets. So let's start with estradiol. What would
I'm not,
be
not a huge fan of oral estradiol. The reason behind that, it processes through the liver. It can cause pro It can increase phlebotomy, meaning it can increase red blood cells. If you ever look at the back of a birth control pack, even though we're talking about bioidentical estrogen, pro-clotting factors are very common. You ladies or whoever's watching this may see or know a friend who took birth control and wind up having a blood clot in their leg or their lung. Those oral contraceptives or oral estradiol can be more pro-clotting. I'm not a huge fan of those. I prefer a cream or an injection. So we're skipping first pass through the liver. Some women don't want to inject, so you can use an estradiol cream. If you have small children, pets, your husband, you rub that cream on him. I promise you, he doesn't need any more estrogen. That's my only concern with those things is, uh, you know, you're going to transfer a lot of that, and the absorption rate varies from individual to individual. So creams would probably be my second favorite. Injection is going to be my favorite. We have a surgical dose of estradiol. We're putting it into the fat. We're injecting it. We know what that's going to do after we start to track that on labs. It's very, very precise with dosing. We're doing it same days of the week. We're going to be able to catch that trend of data. I just think it's more efficient. So I would probably not do oral estradiol. I would do a cream if I'm just absolutely terrified of injections, but I personally think injections are the best way to go.
so the cream? How often would that be administered? Like once, twice a day? Would it be a mixture of estriol and estradiol, like bi-est, I think it's called, or what? Depends on what's the ratio.
Yeah, I would say like if we're looking at menopausal women, maybe a 50-50 bias. So estriol, estradiol. Um, Perimenopause, if someone is experiencing a lot of symptoms of low estrogen, it may be an 80-20. So 80% estriol, 20% estradiol. just varies. For postmenopausal women, usually estradiol cypionate, which is the injectable format, is what most practitioners will use. And you're still going to make some estriol from that. And if we look at estrogen, the whole, you have three different types, and estradiol converts into estriol, and it cannot convert back. So you will convert some of that. Again, that's going to come down to estrogen metabolism. So if someone has poor estrogen metabolism and they favor unfavorable ratios, it's maybe problematic. So that's why it goes back to our first conversation at the beginning of this call, looking at your phases, being really healthy, and then implementing hormones. I think that to answer your question, it could be any of those. It's just depending on what the individual feels best on.
Okay. And the injection, how often is the injection for?
Twice a week, pretty minimal, like, somewhere between 2 to 10 milligrams. It's going to depend on the woman. Some women need very, very small amounts. Some women may need more. But somewhere in that 2 to 10 milligrams seems to be a good spot.
Okay, that's moving on to progesterone. Is that through cream or is it micronized pill? What's works
I
best?
prefer the I prefer the micronized pill. Honestly, that would be my preferred method. I worked with a really, really good OBGYN at a HRT clinic for some years, and she said the only reason, and I don't know if this is true, but I trusted her, and she's such a mentor to me that uh, most of the data on protecting the endometrium is best served off of an oral micronized progesterone versus a cream. Her thoughts were that compounding pharmacies seen that you could make creams and use them. You may be able to use a cream to relieve symptoms, but if we're trying to protect reproductive organs, oral would be the best format. Those are kind of my thoughts on it. I can't point you to any clinical data on that, but I've seen the pills work a little bit better than the creams. But again, it's going to depend on the individual and where you feel your best and what you want to do. Because if you won't take it because it's a cream and you forget to do it every day because you don't like to put on lotion, then you're not really better off. So it just depends on what you're more likely to do and where you feel your best.
Would the progesterone pill, not have any effect on the liver?
So it's going to be a little bit different than the estrogen. I would think that you probably still have everything that goes through. I mean, if you take an Advil or uh, berberine, all of those things are going to pass through the liver. You probably have some, but I think estrogen is more problematic via the liver.
Is that the progesterone applied just before sleep, or is it the minimum dose 100 milligrams, or what would be typically the dose and the timing?
So when we look at progesterone working off of GABA receptors in the brain, it depends on how you metabolize it. So you have alpha and beta pathways. When we look at the breakdown of progesterone metabolites, if you favor the alpha pathway, precision analytics, we do a lot of Dutch testing here. That's one of the things they talk about. If you favor the alpha pathway, you may have more GABAergic symptoms from that, meaning more rest, digest, relaxing. Some women take progesterone and don't get any of that, and they may favor that beta pathway. So that the women who don't get any of the parasympathetic benefits from it, they could probably take it wherever. If it makes you sleepy or tired and you like that, and those are the benefits you see from it, and take it before bed. That's usually how it's written. But there's plenty of women I've met who says, "Oh, I take it. It doesn't help me fall asleep. I feel better, but it's not in the sense of like I'm relaxed and it zonks me out." And then other women say, "Oh, I take it and it's very, very helpful for making me sleepy and relaxed and tired." So it just depends on how you break it down. Perimenopause, maybe somewhere around 50 upwards to 125 milligrams. Postmenopausal, maybe 100 upwards to 300. I usually don't see women doing that well when progesterone is really high. It can cause some issues, but it's just depending on, how they handle it.
Okay, and testosterone then, we've said pellets are not advisable. The cream or injection for a woman?
Yeah, that's my preferred. Somewhere around like 2.4 milligrams per click if we're looking at a pump or a cream. Injections, maybe somewhere between 2 and 7 milligrams.
Okay, so Why is a lower dosage often prescribed at the start, and how are dosages adjusted over time? Because you said it depends on what feedback symptoms. So it's a
Yeah.
constant going back, is it, with the practitioner? What dosage,
Yes.
how they feel? Can you tell me more about that?
So the first thing we want to think about with hormones, they're used for off-label use. So we're being prescribed them, but insurance is not going to cover them. So we're really just trying to work off of symptoms. What we don't want to do is overshoot it and give you too much hormones, and you're starting to use these and you're starting to have a lot of negative symptoms around them because you're overdoing it. Starting at a lower dose and titrating up, it's always easier to add to a fire than try to take away from the fire. Rechecking labs, I would say, 8 weeks after introducing hormones, look at symptoms, look at labs, look at them together, and then come up with a solution with your practitioners. Like, hey, these things are feeling really good. Hypothetically, the testosterone's moving in a good direction. I feel really good here. But I'm not feeling any relief from the estrogen. And we pulled the labs and the FSH is still elevated. Estrogen hasn't really picked up. Maybe the practitioner increases dosing at that point.
So do you always start with a single hormone, progesterone or testosterone? It depends again.
If you're postmenopausal and you're bottomed out and everything, we probably need to put a triage in there and start low and titrate up. If you're perimenopause, yeah, maybe start with testosterone. I think progesterone is like over touted. Everybody says like take progesterone, take progesterone. I think testosterone, from what I've seen, is more beneficial than progesterone. So starting with a single hormone like that, maybe think about adding some progesterone if you're still having insomnia or some other issues, may be beneficial at that point. But if you're postmenopausal, you probably just need to start all three and then find appropriate dosing.
The postmenopausal, all three, and then peri, it depends on symptoms, on lab.
Depend. Yeah. Man, I wish I could be like, hey, it's just this, like just do these things. But again, that's what makes this such a cool thing, and a thing I love so much is we have to customize everything for everybody. It's not a one size fits all. Similar to nutrition, it's not, hey, eat this, do this. We all are a little different. We can give general advice, but when it comes down to it, we're all going to break down food, drugs differently.
So what's the significance of after starting hormones, the 8 weeks process, and then after the initial 8 weeks, is it labs every 2 months again, or 3 months, or 4 months? How often does the practitioner talk to the patient?
So it depends at the clinic, what clinic you're going to. Some don't call you in for a full calendar year. My advice for most people, I would be checking probably. So you did it initially 8 weeks. I would probably do it in another, 12 to 16 weeks, maybe every 6 months. Really, doing it once a year is not enough. Hypothetically, someone were to have really high red blood cells because they were overdosing their estrogen and they didn't go in for a year. And now they're, at risk for clots or stroke. It's just, that's just concerning. So I personally pay for labs and do them on a very regular basis. And I'm usually an advocate of that for people. I think the diagnostics are extremely important to track over time. But if we're looking at like minimums from a clinic, probably 2 to 3 times a year is like what they're going to want from a legal compliance standpoint.
And how long does it typically take for a woman to kind of get everything in order, like find her sweet point or feel her best? Is it 1 month, 2, 3? It depends.
I
How
would probably say it depends on, like, is she doing all the other things? Again, it kind of goes back to how metabolically healthy is she? Sometimes you just put them in place and they click and they're like, oh my goodness, 8 weeks, I feel great. Sometimes I see it maybe taking 4 or 5 months to really get everything in order. It just depends on how much dysfunction is present.
So what would be the kind of the labs you look at, the optimal labs? Again, it's based on symptoms, how they're feeling, but optimal labs for estradiol for a woman on HRT would be.
I think it's going to vary quite a bit. It's going to be based off more. My thoughts with estradiol is going to be based off of FSH suppression. So if her estradiol is a 70, but her FSH is still 25, it's probably not enough because that FSH is telling the brain is telling the ovary there's not enough estrogen present. So hypothetically, estradiol is 120 and FSH is 11. That's probably a better spot, but it's also going to come down to how the patient is feeling. You know, again, I never want to go just off of labs like, hey, these are the ranges. You have to fit within these ranges. But usually a good indicator is suppression of FSH. That means there's enough estradiol present.
So yeah, suppression of FSH when on estradiol should be below 25%, but not too
I
low.
would say so, probably less than 20. You know, I would say that that means your body's saying, "Hey, there's estrogen present. Our my brain doesn't have to work as hard to start to make estradiol because there's enough present." Similar to thyroid. You know, we look at elevations of TSH, that means there's not enough thyroid hormone present. Not saying you just need to take thyroid hormone, but when you take thyroid hormone, pulls down TSH. Similar concept with FSH and estradiol. When there's enough estradiol present, FSH comes down.
Okay, and progesterone and testosterone, again, it really depends. Well, what do you look at labs again? In
I would
terms,
say testosterone. It depends. So, someone's perimenopause, we don't want to make them inovulatory with testosterone. So, usually around 75 or 80 is where we can still have a normal menstrual cycle. If we start creeping up into the low 100s, we may start to miss menstrual cycles. So, reproduction is something we think about if we're giving testosterone. Probably most women around 45, as they're starting to be in perimenopause, aren't planning to have more children. So it's really going to be based off of like, hey, where am I relieved of symptoms, but I'm not having any negative side effects? Testosterone 5 alpha reduces into DHT. You know, you don't want to grow facial hair. You don't want to lose the hair on your scalp. Um, that's a whole other conversation because we need to be glucose and insulin sensitive to keep sex hormone binding globulin elevated so we don't have those side effects. So again, being metabolically healthy before taking hormones.
exactly.
Progesterone symptoms. It's going to be really hard to track progesterone on labs. It's very much based off of symptoms like, hey, I take the 125 milligrams of micronized progesterone. I feel better. You know, I think that it's going to be very much based off of symptoms instead of trying to chase a number on labs.